Welcome back to our studies on fiction writing. I'm Kenny Noble, and I'll be your instructor for this course. In the last lecture, we looked at characters, how many characters you need, and the basics of characters. In this lecture, we're going to look at characterization, the makeup of your characters, what makes a good character, and hopefully give you some good ideas to help you in your writing efforts. First, I'd like to mention one of the most important aspects of fiction writing. In fact, I call this the Cardinal Rule of fiction writing. I believe there are at least 3 or 4 cardinal rules of fiction writing, and this is one of the most important. And that is that you must have tension in your story on every page, preferably every line. The flaw we have is that most of us are nice people, and we want to get along. But that doesn't make us good writers. A good writer has to stir up problems, cause discontent, and it has to show on the page. So that means the first thing that you're going to have to do for your story is have a problem for your character. Again, it may not necessarily be the overarching story problem, but your character has to be in trouble, has to have a problem. And the best way to do that is to have good, interesting characters that can face these problems and overcome the difficulties. And this brings us to another point about fiction writing. When a reader picks up your book, the first thing they want to do is find somebody that they're supposed to root for. They want to root for the main character, and they have to know who that main character is. Typically in our culture, most stories have the main character as the first person that appears on the page. Again, there's exceptions to this. That's not always the rule, but most of the time the first person the reader meets is the main character. So that's a good principle that you can use for your advantage. And that character, again, must start out facing some kind of problem. It doesn't have to be a big problem, but it has to be some kind of problem that the reader can worry about. Because we as readers want to pull for someone, want to root for someone, want to vicariously live through the life of our characters. So we can use that as a writer to your advantage. The next point is that you have to give your character qualities that will make the reader like them and want to root for them. Your character has to have good qualities, and that has to be shown. Those qualities have to be shown early in the story so that we can root for the character. And we all know this intuitively. By nature, we don't like people that are mean to animals. By nature, we don't like people that are mean to children. By nature, we judge people depending upon the way they're dressed, the vehicles they drive, how they talk, and you can use that to make first impressions of your characters. So I want to give you a few points that you can use to make the reader like your character right off. You don't have to use all of these points, but they might be helpful to you as a writer. First, make your character good at something. Maybe it's their job that they're good at. Maybe they have a skill. Maybe they're good at reading people, but make your character good at something. And you can do that by having other characters mentioning to themselves or to other people how that your main character has this skill, whether it's good at their job, good at shooting a gun, good at something physically, that they're kind to other people, that they have ability to read other people, but something. That's one of the first things that you can do to help the reader root for your character is to learn that they're good at something. And of course, we want to see that the main character is humble about it. We don't want to see them proud. We tend not to like people that are proud or boastful about their skills. Another way to make your character favorable in the eyes of the reader is to have them to be done wrong. Maybe they've been treated unfairly over something. Maybe they lost their job. But add this quality that they've been wrong somehow, because we tend to, by nature, root for the underdog. And so if someone has been done wrong, then make that clear on the page, and that'll help us to like your character. Another way to build likability in your character is, as I've previously mentioned, have your character to be favorable with children. They're good with children. Children like them. Because we feel like innately animals and children know a good person and can tell the good person from the bad. So you might possibly want to make your character to have favor with animals or with children. Next, make your character face insurmountable odds. Whatever is against them, make it at such extremes that it looks like there's no way that they can possibly overcome. They've been treated unfairly, something's against them, they have a problem, and the odds just doesn't look good for them. and your character will tend to gain sympathy from your reader. I'm sure you can think of other ideas to gain reader favor for your story. For example, you might make your reader attractive, but not too attractive. Make them strong, but maybe not so strong that it's distasteful. Make them work hard for what they've earned. So that's a start to introduce your characters, but what your reader sees about your character is really going to be just the tip of the iceberg. And you certainly do not want to make your characters stereotypes, but you can use the stereotype to your advantage. Characters who fit within a stereotype are familiar to us, and we seem to know them, and thus we aren't really all that interested in them. But a stereotype could be a starting place for your character. For example, you could use the stereotype of having a character appear as the soccer mom that takes her children to soccer practice, ball practice, violin lessons, goes to PTA meetings, and is just a busy mother. Yet we find out she has a serious flaw because at one time she was a prostitute, and now her old life has come back to visit her. Or we have this same mother that's just so perfect that takes care of her children, her husband, and then suddenly we find out that she has a mean streak in her. Next, let's look at character roles. We're going to look at character roles and then character archetypes. But first, let's look at the roles that characters play. Well, as we've already discussed, you have your main character, who's the person that's trying to solve the story problem most of the time. And then you have your antagonist, who is the person that's usually trying to stop the main character from solving their problem. So those are two positions or roles that each of those characters are playing. Now that's not necessarily always true, because the antagonist could be the main character. By definition, the antagonist is the character that causes change. This is the person that's proactive, the person that takes the proper steps to upset the apple cart and get things changing. But for the most part, the antagonist is the character that's trying to stop the main character from reaching their goal. Often stories will have a sidekick. It isn't required, but of course it makes the story interesting. The main character may have someone that they can bounce their ideas, their conversation, their dialogue off of. And this sidekick often has a sense of humor, often has more of a sense of humor than the main character. And we seem to like that in our stories. We tend to like those types of stories. And going along with the same idea, the antagonist often has a sidekick, and we refer to that person as the henchman. And basically it's the same role, only with the antagonist. Often there's a person in the story that is the emotional person. Often in the story there's the person that's the skeptical. Usually it's someone, not the antagonist, but still they're trying to advise the main character against trying to achieve their goal. So for example, if this was a detective FBI type story, then the main character, the protagonist, is trying to solve the case or devote him or herself intensely to find the antagonist, but yet the chief of police is telling them to leave it alone. This person's very skeptical, telling them they can't solve the case, that they've already invested too much time, or it's not their business. So there's a skeptic role that characters play. So we have the protagonist, the antagonist, the skeptic, the sidekick, the emotional person. Also, oftentimes we'll find what I call person of reason. They're not really the skeptic, but they're the person that carries the idea of reasoning through the story. This reason person is usually calm and collected, doesn't get really excited, and all their actions are based on logic. That's what pushes them forward, is logic. And then there's the famous guardian. This is a role that you'll see in many stories. The guardian looks out for the main character, often gives them advice, and it's not uncommon for the guardian to appear early in the story, and then middle ways of the story, the main character seeks out the guardian for information or help. And then later in the story, maybe 3/4 of the way or just before the end, the guardian gives the main character some special advice or some extra power or ability that helps them. Often this guardian is an old man or an old woman or a college professor or the retired chief of police or a grandfather. And last of all, there's the contagonist. The contagonist isn't talked about a lot, but the contagonist appears in a lot of stories. Usually this person is paired with the main character, but not always. And the contagonist functions often as the conscience or as a temptation. That's why the contagonist is often the romantic interest. The main characters are usually, of course, the protagonist and the antagonist, and the guardian and the contagonist. Those four get more screen time, it seems like, more pages. The reason, emotion, sidekick, and skeptic are kind of backseat drivers. They're minor characters. They don't get a lot of screen time or a lot of time on the page. So let's look at the Wizard of Oz. In the Wizard of Oz, Dorothy is the protagonist. The Cowardly Lion fills out the role of skeptic, and Toto performs as the sidekick. It seems like Glinda is the guardian, and the Wicked Witch, in this case, is the contagonist. That kind of balances out the guardian. The Wicked Witch acts like the antagonist, but really the antagonist is the wizard himself. So the protagonist is Dorothy, the guardian is Glinda, the witch is the contagonist, and the antagonist is the wizard. Then for the minor characters, or the backseat drivers, the sidekick is Toto, emotion is Tin Man, reason is Scarecrow, and the lion is the skeptic. Before we close, let's look briefly at archetypes. You would do yourself a favor to research and do a study on archetypes. This doesn't mean that your character, again, will be the stereotype or fit perfectly in the archetype, but this will help you get a starting place. Most commonly, it's agreed upon that there are at least 16 archetypes, 8 for the male and 8 for the female. And you'll recognize some of these. For the male, there's the chief, the bad boy, the best friend, the lost soul, the charmer, the professor, the swashbuckler, and the warrior. For the female, there's the boss, the seductress, the spunky kid, the free spirit, the librarian, the waif, the crusader, and their nurturer. Now let's look at some of these and you'll recognize some right off. The chief. This is the strong-willed person that needs to fix the problems, that needs to be in charge. He's usually obstinate, dominating, maybe even proud and stubborn. And often this character in stories, it goes by the title or the name of chief. And there's the bad boy. They're moody and reckless, has his own conduct of rules, has a devil-may-care attitude. The best friend. The best friend archetype is the character of the year. Everybody likes them. Everybody wants to be around them. They're easy to get along with, friends with everyone. They're supportive, a gentleman, focuses on the details, has lots of friends. Then there's the charmer. The charmer would make a great salesperson or even a politician. His smile goes a long way. He's manipulative. Sometimes his behavior is erratic. Then there's the lost soul, Charlie Brown. He always remembers every wrong done to him. Spends more time in the valley than he does on the mountaintop. He's brooding and unforgiving. The professor, Sherlock Holmes, they're a slave to logic. The swashbuckler, Peter Pan, Robin Hood. The warrior has fought many battles and not afraid to fight another one. The female archetype, there's the boss, which is similar to the chief role of the male. There's the seductress. Think of Scarlett O'Hara or Delilah. There's the spunky kid. She's kind of the female version of the best friend. Full of energy, creative, willing to explore new ideas. Then there's the famous free spirit archetype. Think of Lucille Ball, willing to try new things, charms the socks off of everybody. A little bit klutzy, meddling, undisciplined. The waif, Cinderella, Dorothy and the Wizard of Oz. She's pure, trusting, kind, but insecure, a little passive. The librarian, she's efficient, she's serious, she's dependable, she's a perfectionist. The crusader, she's a fighter, she's courageous. The nurturer, think of Mary Poppins. She's a wonderful listener. She's altruistic. She's full of optimism. So that's just a rough overview of archetypes. Again, you would do yourself a favor by researching these. And how I use archetypes, I consider that my character has one dominant archetype, but they might be, for example, my hero might be 40% chief archetype and 60% swashbuckler. And we all know people that are like this. They're the chief when they're on the job, but at home they're the nurturer. So there's archetypes. Hope that'll help you with your stories, give you some good ideas, some places to start and to work. There's a lot more to be said about every one of these topics. This is just an overview to give you an introduction to fiction writing and just to help you get your story started and give you a direction, a place to go. So I hope that helps. I'll see you in the next lecture.